She is not my daughter. Those 5 words hung in the sterile air of the mediator's office like a guillotine blade, sharp and final. My mother, Evelyn, did not scream them. She did not sob. She said them with a terrifying, icy detachment, as if she were clarifying a clerical error on a grocery receipt. She sat across from me in her tailored charcoal suit, her pearls glowing under the fluorescent lights, her gaze never once wavering. For 27 years, I had been the family disappointment, the girl who never quite fit the mold, but I never expected her to look at me with such pure, unadulterated loathing while a legal professional looked on in stunned silence. The mediator, a man named Mr. Henderson who had spent 30 years navigating the messiest divorces and estate battles in the city, paused with his pen hovering over a stack of documents. He looked from Evelyn to me, his brow furrowed. I felt the blood drain from my face, my hands trembling beneath the mahogany table. We were there to settle my late father's estate, or more specifically, the mysterious trust fund he had left exclusively to me, bypassing Evelyn and my younger brother entirely. It was a move that had sent the family into a tailspin of resentment. "Clara, I know this is difficult," Mr. Henderson began, his voice soft, "but Mrs. Vance, are you speaking metaphorically? Are you expressing your emotional estrangement from your daughter?" Evelyn leaned forward, the scent of her expensive French perfume filling the small room. It was a scent that used to mean comfort to me when I was a toddler, but now it felt like the smell of a cold, empty tomb. "I am speaking literally, Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "This girl, this person sitting across from me, is not my biological child. She is an interloper. She is a fraud who has been leeching off our family name for nearly 3 decades. And I refuse to let her take 1 cent of my late husband's hard-earned money." The room went deathly quiet. I felt like I was drowning. My entire life flashed before my eyes, but it was a life of blurred edges and missing pieces. I remembered the way my mother always looked through me rather than at me. I remembered the family photos where I was always standing slightly apart, the only one with dark, wavy hair and olive skin in a family of fair-skinned, blonde-haired people. I had always been told I took after some distant, Mediterranean ancestor on my father's side. "Mom, what are you saying?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "I have your birth certificate. I have photos of us in the hospital. I have the scars on my knees from falling off the bike you bought me." "How can you say this?" Evelyn's lip curled in a sneer. "That birth certificate is a piece of paper, Clara. And photos can be staged. You were a mistake, a burden your father insisted on carrying, and I am finished playing the part of the grieving mother." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, looking deeply uncomfortable. "This is a very serious allegation, Mrs. Vance. If you are claiming that Clara is not your daughter, you are essentially accusing your late husband of some form of fraud or kidnapping. Is that the path you want to take?" Evelyn shrugged her shoulders elegantly. "I don't care what you call it. I want her out of the will. I want her out of my house. And I want her out of my life." I reached for the heavy leather file folder I had brought with me. It was a collection of documents my father had given me just weeks before he passed away from a sudden heart attack. He had handed it to me with trembling hands, telling me to keep it safe and not to open it unless I absolutely had to. I had assumed it was just boring financial records, deeds to the property, or perhaps some sentimental letters. I hadn't even looked through it yet, too consumed by grief to face the contents of his private life. "If I'm not yours, then who am I?" I asked, my voice gaining a sudden, desperate strength. "Because Dad loved me. He wouldn't have lied to me." "He loved a fantasy," Evelyn snapped. I flipped open the folder, my eyes blurring with tears. "Mr. Henderson, please," I said, pushing the folder across the desk. "My father gave me this. He said it would explain everything. If there's some kind of proof of my birth, it's in here." Mr. Henderson took the folder. He pulled out the first few pages, which were indeed standard bank statements and the deed to the family cabin in Maine. But as he reached the middle of the folder, his movements slowed. He pulled out a small, yellowed envelope that had been tucked between two legal briefs. Inside were several glossy photographs, the kind you use to get developed at a pharmacy. As Mr. Henderson looked at the first photo, his face went from professional neutrality to a mask of absolute horror. He looked up at Evelyn, then back at the photo, then at me. His hands began to shake. He didn't say a word. He just flipped to the next photo, and then the next. "What is it?" I asked, leaning forward, trying to see. Evelyn remained composed, though a flicker of something, maybe curiosity or perhaps a hidden fear, crossed her eyes. "What are you looking at, Henderson?" "It's probably just more of David's sentimental nonsense." Mr. Henderson didn't answer her. He reached for his desk phone and dialed a 3-digit number. I watched in a daze as he spoke into the receiver. "Yes, this is Arthur Henderson at the law offices of Henderson and Associates. I need immediate police assistance at my office." "Yes, it's an emergency. I believe I am in possession of evidence regarding a 25-year-old cold case." "No, do not wait. Send them now." He hung up the phone and looked at me, his eyes full of a pity that terrified me more than my mother's hatred. "Clara," he said softly, "I need you to stay very still. And Mrs. Vance, I suggest you don't try to leave this room." "What on earth are you talking about?" Evelyn demanded, standing up. "This is a mediation for a civil estate, not a police station. You have no right to hold me here." Mr. Henderson slid the photos across the desk, but not toward me. He slid them toward the center, where we could both see them. The first photo was of a hospital room, but it wasn't a happy birth scene. It was a photo of a woman I didn't recognize, lying in a bed, looking pale and exhausted. Next to her was my father, looking younger, his face etched with a grief so profound it was painful to look at. But it was the second photo that stopped my heart. It was a picture of a baby, wrapped in a pink blanket. But the baby was in a crib that looked like it belonged in a nursery, not a hospital. Behind the crib, on the wall, was a missing persons poster. The poster featured a grainy image of a woman, the same woman from the hospital bed, and a headline that read, "Help US Find Baby Sarah." The third photo was the most damning. It was a Polaroid of my mother, Evelyn, standing in a dark hallway. She was holding a bundle in her arms, her face caught in the flash of the camera. She looked terrified, her eyes wide, her mouth open as if she had been caught mid-scream. Behind her, a door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, you could see a woman slumped on the floor, a dark pool spreading beneath her. I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked at the woman in the missing persons poster. She had my eyes. She had my jawline. She had the same small mole on her left cheek that I had spent years trying to cover with makeup. "You stole me," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Evelyn didn't move. She didn't blink. She just stared at the photos with a cold, calculating intensity. "David was a fool," she said finally, her voice devoid of any emotion. "He kept those? I told him to burn them. I told him we could start over, that we could be a real family. But he always had to keep a piece of the truth, didn't he? He thought it was his penance." "You killed her," I said, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. "You killed my mother and you took me." "She was a nobody," Evelyn said, waving her hand as if she were dismissing a fly. "A waitress at some roadside diner David frequented during his business trips. He fell in love with her, can you believe that? He wanted to leave me for her. He wanted to take his money and his status and give it to a woman who smelled of grease and cheap cigarettes." She sat back down, smoothing her skirt. "When the baby was born, he told me. He actually had the audacity to ask for a divorce so he could go be a father to her child. I couldn't let that happen. The Vance name means something in this town. I wasn't going to let some bastard child and a trailer park mistress ruin everything I worked for. So you went there, I prompted, my voice trembling with a mix of horror and a strange, cold clarity. Evelyn smiled, a thin, sharp line. I went there to talk. To offer her money to disappear. But she was stubborn. She started screaming. She said she didn't want my money, she wanted David. We struggled. She fell. It was an accident, really. But then there you were, crying in your little plastic tub. I realized then that if I took you, David would never leave. He would be tied to me by a secret so dark he could never breathe a word of it. He would be my prisoner as much as he was my husband. And he did it, I said, thinking of my father's quiet, somber presence throughout my childhood. He lived with that for 27 years. He was a coward, Evelyn said. He spent every day looking at you and seeing her. That's why he couldn't love you. That's why he left you that money. He thought he could buy your forgiveness from the grave. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. Mr. Henderson kept his hand near the phone, his eyes locked on Evelyn as if she were a venomous snake ready to strike. I sat there, looking at the photos of the woman who should have raised me. I looked at her kind eyes and wondered what my life would have been like if I had grown up in a house filled with love instead of cold, calculated silence. The police arrived in a whirlwind of heavy boots and barking orders. 2 officers entered the room, their faces grim as Mr. Henderson handed them the folder. They looked at the photos, then at Evelyn, who didn't even flinch when they pulled out the handcuffs. Evelyn Vance, you are under arrest for the murder of Maria Santos and the kidnapping of Sarah Santos, one of the officers said, his voice booming in the small office. As they led her away, she paused by my chair. She leaned down, her face inches from mine. You might have the money now, Sarah, she hissed, using the name on the poster for the first time. But you'll always be the daughter of a waitress. You'll never be a Vance. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I watched her go, the woman I had called mother for 27 years, as she was escorted out in shame. After she was gone, the room felt strangely empty. Mr. Henderson sat back, rubbing his temples. I've seen a lot of things in this job, Clara, he said. But I've never seen anything like this. Your father, he must have been living in a private hell. He left me the truth, I said, clutching the folder to my chest. That's all I ever wanted. The next few months were a blur of legal proceedings, DNA tests, and media frenzies. The story of the stolen Vance baby captivated the nation. I was no longer Clara Vance, the socialite's disappointment. I was Sarah Santos, the miracle survivor of a decades-old tragedy. The DNA tests confirmed what the photos suggested. I was indeed the biological daughter of Maria Santos and David Vance. My father had been having an affair, yes, but he had truly loved Maria. The investigation into Maria's death was reopened, and with the evidence in the folder, the police were able to find the forensic links they had missed decades ago. They found Maria's remains buried under the floorboards of an old summer house the Vances had sold years ago. But the most incredible part of the journey wasn't the justice for Maria or the downfall of Evelyn. It was finding my real family. Maria had a sister, a woman named Sophia, who had never stopped looking for her. When she saw my face on the news, she drove 10 hours to see me. When we met, she didn't see a stranger. She saw her sister. She hugged me and cried, telling me stories about Maria, how she loved to sing, how she grew the most beautiful sunflowers, and how she had been so excited to become a mother. I learned that I had cousins, aunts, and an entire history I had been robbed of. They didn't care about the Vance money or the status. They just wanted to know me. Evelyn was eventually convicted of first-degree murder and kidnapping. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. My brother, Leo, who had always been the golden child, was devastated. He hadn't known the truth, but he had benefited from the lie his entire life. He refused to speak to me, blaming me for destroying the family, but I realized I hadn't destroyed anything. I had simply pulled back the curtain on a house that was already rotten to the core. I decided to keep the trust fund my father left me, but I didn't use it for myself. I established the Maria Santos Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping families of missing children and providing resources for cold case investigations. I wanted Maria's name to stand for something more than a tragedy. One afternoon, a year after the mediation, I visited the site where Maria had been found. It was a quiet, wooded area, now cleared and turned into a small memorial garden. I planted a row of sunflowers, their bright yellow heads turning toward the sun. I sat on a stone bench, feeling the breeze on my face. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was. I wasn't an interloper or a fraud. I was a daughter who had been lost and was finally found. As I looked at the sunflowers, I pulled a small, worn photo from my pocket. It wasn't one of the crime scene photos. It was a picture Sophia had given me. It was Maria, young and radiant, holding a tiny infant in her arms, looking down with a smile of pure, unconditional love. I finally understood why my father had kept the file. He knew that one day, Evelyn's hatred would boil over. He knew she would try to erase me once he was gone. He gave me the tools to save myself, and in doing so, he gave me back the mother I was always meant to have. The silence of the garden was peaceful, a far cry from the cold silence of the Vance mansion. I realized then that blood doesn't make a family, but neither does a name. Family is built on truth, on the courage to face the past, and on the love that survives even the darkest of secrets. I stood up, brushed the dirt from my jeans, and walked toward my car. I had a dinner to get to at Sophia's house. There would be loud music, the smell of home-cooked food, and stories of a woman named Maria who lived on through me. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a woman who finally recognized herself. I wasn't just a survivor. I was Sarah. And for the first time, that was more than enough. The legal battle for the remainder of the Vance estate continued for years, but I stayed out of it. My brother and his lawyers fought over the properties and the stocks, but I had already taken the only thing that mattered. The truth was a heavier inheritance than any amount of gold, but it was one I carried with pride. Evelyn died in prison 5 years into her sentence. She never expressed remorse. She never asked to see me. Her last words, according to the guards, were a complaint about the quality of the linens in the infirmary. She died as she lived, wrapped in a shroud of her own perceived superiority, cold and alone. But I wasn't alone. I had found a community of people who understood what it meant to be lost. I spent my days working with the foundation, meeting parents who were still searching for their children, and investigators who refused to give up on old files. Every time a child was found, or a family received closure, I felt a piece of my own soul heal. I often thought back to that day in Mr. Henderson's office. The shock, the fear, the moment my entire world collapsed. I realized that the moment my mother said she is not my daughter, she was telling the first truth she had ever uttered to me. She wasn't my mother. She was a captor. And by rejecting me, she had inadvertently set me free. My life as Sarah Santos was different than my life as Clara Vance. It was humbler, louder, and infinitely more vibrant. I learned how to cook the recipes Maria had loved. I learned the language of the family I had lost. I learned that I didn't need a pedigree to be worthy of love. One evening, while sitting on the porch of the small cottage I had bought with my own earnings, Sophia joined me with 2 mugs of coffee. "You look like her today," she said, tucking a stray lock of hair behind my ear. "You have her spirit." I smiled, looking out at the horizon where the sun was dipping below the trees. I hope so, Sophia. I really hope so. The file that had changed everything was now kept in a safe at the foundation, a reminder of why we did the work we did. But I didn't need to look at the photos anymore. The images were burned into my memory, not as scenes of horror, but as the map that led me home. In the end, the woman who tried to steal my life only succeeded in giving me a better one. She tried to make me a ghost in my own home, but instead, she made me the heroine of my own story. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, I knew that Maria was watching, her heart full, as her daughter finally lived the life she had once dreamed for her. The police had called it a cold case, but for me, the fire of the truth had finally warmed a life that had been frozen for far too long. I was no longer the girl in the background of the photos. I was the one holding the camera now, capturing a life built on my own terms, a life that belonged to no one but me. The journey from Clara to Sarah had been long and painful, but as I sat on that porch, surrounded by the scent of pine and the sound of crickets, I knew I wouldn't change a single step of it. The mediator's office had been the end of a lie, but it was the beginning of everything else. And as I took a sip of my coffee, I realized that for the first time in 27 years, I was exactly where I was supposed to be.